is he here?
It's all right. We have YouTube. This is all live.
All right, we will start the committee hearing, this joint meeting, House and Senate on ABC. My plan for this is just to allow people to get up here and kind of give us some information, some facts about the issue at hand. I believe we all understand kind of what we're dealing with. I don't think this is anything, any new revelations are going to be made here. We understand that, a lot of circumstances have occurred that have caused ABC to kind of be in a position of a little bit of a struggle right now, but they're working hard. I actually went out there today and walked over the place and met with some people out there, and it's something we're going to continue to do and to visit with them. But this is a chance for Department of Revenue to kind of give everybody on the committee a good once-over of all the issues and the policies and the revenue and the expenses of ABC, and just so we know what we're dealing with. I want the facts to be laid out there for everybody, and then we can kind of make a judgment where to go from there. But I appreciate Representative Lamar and his committee members he chose being here, and Senate members that are here. Thank y'all for being here. And I'll turn it over to Representative Lamar to make any comments he wants to make.
Thank you, Senator Harkins. Just very briefly, excuse me, if I can make this work. Very briefly, just want everybody to know that we're excited about this. This is something that have needed attention for some time. So we get a pretty packed 2 days, and we look forward to hearing from everybody. And just ask the committee members to keep an open mind. We want to give everybody a fair shake, get every side a fair shake, and see what options are out there. I would encourage you to ask questions. That's what this process is for. Let's get as much information as we can so we can make the best decisions that we possibly can make going forward. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. And we'll start by hearing from the Department of Revenue Commissioner Chris Graham, who is also a member of this committee, who will sit over here at the table with us and listen as well. And Meg, I believe you're here. So Chris, you want to go ahead and kick us off, you and Meg? Meg, you could either, I was going to say you could stand up at the podium if you want to add anything to what Chris is saying, but Chris, go ahead, the floor is yours.
She's probably going to have to add a lot to what I'm saying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're glad to be here. We look forward to working with you all and talking about some of the things that the ABC warehouse does, providing you some basic information about the warehouse. I do have Meg Bartlett. She's the Associate Commissioner for the Department of Revenue. We believe that Meg started working for the Department of Revenue when she was 12 years old. She's done a little bit of everything at the department, from slinging cases at the warehouse. I think she mostly worked split cases. She didn't sling a whole lot of cases. But she's worked at the warehouse. She's done pretty much every job you can do at the Department of Revenue at some point in time. We also have David Caldwell here. He's sitting in the audience. He's one of our lawyers, one of our senior lawyers. He does a really good job for us. We have Rusty Hanna. He's the chief of ABC Enforcement, been in state government for a long time. And then I'm Chris Graham. I've been the Commissioner of Revenue for about 9 weeks now, and looking forward to working with you guys through this process. We did bring a couple of handouts that you should have received. We have a one-page handout that shows ABC calendar year case sales. That shows you 2020 January through December and 2019 January through December. September, October, November, and December are estimates based on what we've seen so far this year. So you should have a one-page handout that shows kind of where we are on shipping cases this year. We also have a multiple page handout that shows, it has a couple of different things in it. So you should have two handouts that we brought today. And I'm going to refer to a couple of pages of these, but not everything on every page. I'm going to skip around just a little bit. As it relates to alcoholic beverage control in Mississippi, from my perspective, and I'm not sure that Meg or any of the other employees share this view, but from my perspective, you have the enforcement side, and then you have the warehousing side. And as I understand this committee, you're primarily looking at the warehousing side, but then also what role enforcement could take if there are any potential changes in the future. So most of my comments today will be about the warehousing side, which is a little different from the enforcement side, but you do have those two components of ABC. Just to tell you a little bit about the warehouse, we have roughly 100 employees who are assigned to the warehouse. Most of those are workers who work a line, and Meg's going to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what we do at the warehouse. So we have about 100 workers. About 82 of those are actually line workers. They work in the warehouse, handling cases of liquor and fulfilling orders. They're all state service employees. The pay at the warehouse starts at about $23,000 for a line worker, and it kind of caps out at about $32,000, I think is about where it caps out. And then if you get into management, you have some opportunities to make more money, but the general workers make somewhere between $23,000 and $32,000. The former commissioner and the staff, I think, did a good job of getting some of those employees a raise to get them up to where they are now. They were not making that much a couple years ago. Some emphasis was placed on getting their pay up. It's more competitive now than it was. It still lags some of our other people in the market a little, but the pay is better than it was a couple of years ago. And of course, that's the legislature had to pass bills to fund those raises, and so they were implemented, and the pay out there is not as bad as it once was, and so that's helped a lot with hiring people out there. Of course, turnover in a warehouse is pretty high. The warehouse is not new; it's pretty old. The working conditions, especially in the summer months, can be pretty difficult. Long hours, it's very hot. There's some things that we probably need to do to the warehouse to alleviate those problems. But we have a really good set of core people who work at the warehouse. A lot of them have been there for a while. They work really hard. They're some of the hardest workers in state government. And, you know, being in my former position, I've really got to observe a lot of different departments and agencies. And the folks at the warehouse are workers. They're not sitting in an office. They're not able to work from home, whatever that might look at it. Like at some of our agencies, they're out working their tails off every day. A couple more things about the warehouse revenues. You know, the warehouse brings in revenue to the state, and that's kind of where I wanted to start. The multiple page handout, page 2 of that handout, it's on page 1 as well, but page 2 is probably the report I like the best. When you talk about the ABC warehouse, and like I said, Meg will get into the nuts and bolts a little bit more in just a moment. When you talk about what the warehouse brings in, when liquor or wine is purchased or ordered by a permittee in the state, they pay some fees. The primary fee that you hear about probably most is the statutory markup. So every time an order is placed through the ABC warehouse, there's a statutory markup on the distiller's cost of that product, and that statutory markup is 27.5%. So every time a product is ordered, 27.5% is charged. 24.5% of that goes ultimately to the state general fund. And so every time liquor is ordered, the state general fund, there's a 24.5% markup that the state general fund gets. The other 3% goes to the Department of Mental Health. They have an alcohol abuse fund, I think is what they call it. And so there's a 3% amount that goes to the Department of Mental Health. The other thing that you hear about with the revenue side of ABC is there's a wholesale sales tax. So every time an order is made, there's a sales tax that gets paid on the wholesale price of that liquor. You also have some state excise taxes that are paid, and then you have some freight costs. And so if you look at the second page of this handout I gave you, there's a pretty good report of some of the collections for fiscal year 2020 and fiscal year 2019. So the statutory markup is the first line on that page. And you can see in 2020, the statutory markup that the state actually collected was almost $85 million. And so the state collected $85 million, which represents a markup on the price of distilled spirits and wine. Last year, it was $74 million. And the excise tax is $14.5 million. That's based on how many gallons end up coming into the state, and so that's a set amount based on the gallons. Permit filing fees, that's related to the ABC enforcement side. That's not as much the warehousing side. Permit license fees, same thing. That's on the permitting side, on the enforcement side. Sales tax, that's the sales tax I was referring to earlier that gets charged on the sales. Permit fines, that's on the enforcement side. That was $2,000, and then fingerprint fees of $97,000. That's on the enforcement side as well. And so if you look at the middle of that page, in 2020, the general fund for the portion of the markup, which I think I said was 24.5%, received $73 million in fiscal year 2020. And the year before, it was $66 million. If you look down a little further, the Department of Mental Health, you'll see, received $8.9 million. That's their portion of that statutory markup that I was talking about earlier. And so the statutory markup, the amount transferred is the $73 million and the $8.9 million in fiscal year 2020. And so when you start talking about making changes to the ABC distribution system, those are the fees that could go away if you put a different entity in place. So if you privatized and didn't continue to mark up the price, those funds go away. And so as y'all discuss changes that you might want to make, any changes that could result in the statutory markup going away, that's your number. It's $80 million a year, and it's going up, and it has been growing for a number of years. But that's the magic number that I think this committee will have to discuss and decide. Are we okay with that going away, or do there need to be changes to it? Do we need to increase the statutory markup to potentially fund some changes at the warehouse? And keep in mind, these fees go either into the general fund or go to the Department of Mental Health. They do not come back to the Department of Revenue. So those funds are actually going to the general fund and to the Department of Mental Health. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is on your one-page sheet, and that's the operations of the warehouse. I think this is really important as to like where we are currently. In March, the nature of business at the warehouse changed dramatically as a result of COVID, and I think you can see that if you look at March, April, and May. And in June also, if you look at what we did in 2020 versus 2019, our demand increased substantially when COVID hit. And so far, we've not seen a huge decrease in that demand. So it's remained very strong up until this week. And I don't know if demand will remain strong the rest of the year. But last year, we shipped 3.4 million cases of liquor and wine. This year, we're on pace to exceed 4 million. And so that's a 500,000 case increase year over year. And, we're doing that in the face of pretty tough budget times. The legislature wisely, I think, reduced a number of budgets last year because our state revenues were affected by COVID. But we're seeing an increase of 500,000 calendar year over calendar year on cases that are being purchased. And so that's kind of our current climate. Is we've seen just this tremendous growth in ordering, and we're still operating in a facility. The capacity on our facility is about 20,000 cases a night. It's really 19,000 cases a night. We're working within the budget that we were given, which allows us to work a certain number of hours. We're able to work in some overtime in that. And we're, recently have not been able to keep up with demand. We're working on that, and we think we have a couple of things that could help us with demand issues. But it's going to be a challenge, I think, the rest of the year based on the condition of ordering and then also what we can actually do every night. Other than that, we're happy to answer any questions you have. Meg's going to, I think, give you a quick rundown of kind of how the warehouse operations work. If you look at one other thing I did want to show you, the last page of your multiple page handout, it's too much information, but I think it's very useful information. This actually shows you the actual expenses of the ABC program, and we have it at the top of the page. The top third of the page is the whole ABC program, so that includes both warehouse operations and the enforcement side. And then the middle, the second part, which is kind of the middle of the page, shows what our enforcement actual expenses have been. And then down at the bottom is only warehouse operations. And so you can see how our money has been spent. We can break it out pretty easily going back to 2016. It was a little bit more difficult prior to fiscal year 2016, so we went ahead and went with what we knew we could break out. And so if you just look at FY 2020 for warehouse operations, our salaries budget is $4.9 million with a total budget of $6.5 million. And so with that $6.5 million, we're going to bring in well over $100 million to the state and almost $100 million to the general fund this year. And I think that's a testament to the hard work of the employees at the warehouse, and they go in and work hard every day, and they try to meet our demands. With that, I think I'd turn it over to Meg, unless the chairman either one of our chairmen have a preference on doing it any other way.
I think let Meg go ahead and give her her portion, and then we'll come back and ask questions after she gets done.
Good afternoon. I just want to kind of give you a little bit of just a little information about the ABC and kind of its day-to-day operations, what we do there. Mississippi officially adopted its local option laws in 1966 and established the Alcohol Beverage Control Division of the then State Tax Commission. Local option laws allow counties, judicial districts, and some cities the ability to vote for liquor sales and wine sales within their limits. There's two primary categories of regulation of alcoholic beverages in this country. You have licensed states and you have controlled states. Mississippi is a control state. There are 17 control states and jurisdictions in the United States. Both licensed states and control states license suppliers, wholesalers, and retailers and collect taxes. The controlled states take it, I guess, a step further and control the distribution of the product in the state, whether it be through warehousing facilities like Mississippi does, or a combination of warehousing and retail outlets that several of the control states have. So our ABC regulates and supervises the manufacture, sales, distribution, possession, and transportation of alcoholic beverages in Mississippi, and that's defined to be spirits and wine. The product in our warehouse is held in bailment, so we don't own any of that product. It's held in, we have a small state-owned inventory. It's very, very small, but most of the product in the warehouse is held in bailment. Or it can be done through purchase through a special order process. Currently, we have, I should tell you, the warehouse was built in 1983. We've done one expansion in that time frame, so we have about a 211,000 square foot facility. We added about a 25,000 square foot wine room in 2003, so that's the facility that we have. At the time the facility was built, we had 1,200 different products in the warehouse. As of today, we have 3,722 different products in bailment, and we do a different 14,000 plus items through special order. We try to maintain about a 6-week supply of inventory of the different products that we have in the warehouse. New product listings are considered every other month. and they must meet a sales quota before they can become a product that's listed, meaning that we carry it in bailment in our inventory. We do a twice-a-year delisting process that helps remove the slower products, the slower selling products out of the warehouse so that we have space for new product lines. We run 2 shifts in the warehouse. We run a day shift that does the receiving of the product. We receive about 15 to 19 trucks a day. And then we run a night shift that does our shipping. And as Commissioner Graham indicated, we have about a 19,000 case capacity to ship at night. There is a minimum 10 case order. To place an order, you have to buy at least 10 cases. We do allow them to do split cases. Commissioner mentioned that, and that just simply means if somebody doesn't need a full case of a product, they can do a split case, and it's a 12-bottle case, and they have to order at least 3 bottles of the same item, so they can do up to 4 different items in that split case to form the 12-bottle case. We do charge $1 per bottle in extra cost to cover the cost of working splits. Approximately 71% of our case sales are from spirits, 39% are from wine. The warehouse currently uses a conveyor system for fulfilling our orders. Once the nightly order count is determined, we do what we make the cut, and that tells us how many cases we're going to ship that night. It is sent into the system where we generate labels. Pickers pick based off the labels, and they're placed on the cases, and they go onto the conveyor. They run through a merge. We have scanners that read those labels that separate that out into they read the barcodes on the labels that separate them out for each order, and then the orders are routed together based on the geographical location. I'll tell you one of the struggles that we're having now with a 19,000 case capacity, that what we can generally get done in a night's time, is the fact that our racking only holds about 17,000 cases. So that does create a little bit of a problem for us in trying to ship more than that amount in one night. We do generally work 4 10-hour shifts. I may have already mentioned that, 4 10-hour shifts. We work Monday through Thursday. Right now we're adding extra, and we're working on Fridays as well. The retailers use what we call our TAP system. It's our taxpayer access portal online. All of our retail orders are placed online. When the order is placed, they will receive an order number that reserves the order in our inventory, so it then marks it basically that inventory is reserved for them. The order is shipped via 2 contract carriers that we have. We have a local carrier and a statewide carrier. The retailer is charged for the product once it ships. Prior to COVID, we most often shipped the next day. So when an order was placed, they got their order the next day. That was pretty standard protocol prior to COVID. It's not that way today. Last week, we shipped about 90,000 cases last week, and our order count did not go down. We didn't eat into the backlog any, even though we shipped 90,000 cases, roughly 90,000 cases last week. So we are struggling to keep up with demand. I will share with you just kind of, I think it's some interesting statistics. On an average night when we ship about 19,000 cases, we have our night shift has basically primarily pickers and loaders. Our pickers will move about 19 tons per person in one night. Our truck loaders can lift up to 60 tons per day. So Commissioner Graham indicated that these are hard-working positions. They are very, it's hard manual labor in a non-climate controlled facility. So you can imagine how uncomfortable an August night in the warehouse would be when you're lifting 19 tons and putting those onto conveyors. That's kind of just the brief overview I did want to just cover. I think it's in some of the information that you have. Our tax is $2.50 a gallon on distilled spirits. It is $1 per gallon for sparkling wines and champagne, 35 cents a gallon for other wines, and Commissioner mentioned we have the 27.5% markup that's charged. That's the end of my prepared comments. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Okay. Some of the things I wanted to touch on, and I think we talked about this earlier, explain how the retailer is prepaying the sales tax on their purchase, and then how that works when they actually sell the product and remit tax to the state.
For distilled spirit, or for alcoholic beverages and for beer, it's the same way for beer, but for alcoholic beverages, the ABC charges a 7% wholesale sales tax. We actually are a taxpayer to the Department of Revenue. We remit that tax monthly to the Department of Revenue as a wholesale sales tax. And so that is included in the price that the retailer pays for their product. When the retailer sells the product at their store, they charge the 7% retail sales tax on the sale to you and me when we go in and buy our bottle of wine or our bottle of whiskey or whatever. We'll pay a 7% retail tax. When that retailer files their monthly sales tax return, they report their retail sales tax, but they take a credit for the wholesale sales tax that they paid on that product to the ABC. So essentially, you're getting some of the sales tax earlier through the wholesale sale, but it allows us to then also, if what they're paying it at the retail location, that's where we do the city diversion that is done off sales tax, is done off the retail sales tax, so that each city can get their piece of the sales tax from the liquor stores in their municipality.
In the warehouse, I'm not sure how many committee members have taken a tour. I know it's been difficult with COVID and y'all trying to keep, people that are essential in there and everybody else out. But what is the biggest, the biggest, I guess, need in the sense of the warehouse functioning? And is it the actual hard equipment, such as the rollers and the conveyor belts and the software, or is it the equipment they're driving, the forklifts, the pallet jacks, all that stuff that they're running around on? I talked to one of the gentlemen out there today, and he was talking about just the equipment that they used out there and how, typically they got about a 3-year shelf life and they're operating on 5 years. Explain kind of the situation at the warehouse with the equipment that is there now, as far as the conveyor system and the equipment that y'all are using, working, running the pallets around and stuff.
So I think it's a short-term and a long-term need, to be honest with you, when you look at it that way. The conveyor system is pretty much past its useful life, to be honest with you. We've had it for a number of years, for about, I guess, 20 plus years. That conveyor's 17 years, I guess, that conveyor system has been operational, and it does cause us some significant problems at the capacity, especially when we're trying to do capacity every night. It does cause us some problems because the way that it works, when you're doing large orders every night, there is going to be some downtime associated with that when your conveyor's full. And so it's trying to then merge those loads and send them down to be loaded onto the truck, and so it can back up because it gets full. The conveyor certainly, in a non-climate controlled facility, it travels 1.5 miles of conveyor. So one case, when you put it onto that conveyor, before it gets all the way through and out, it's traveling about 1.5 miles of conveyor to go that one case. And so because it's a non-climate controlled facility, and in the last 10 years, we've seen a significant decline in the quality of packaging. The boxes are much thinner cardboard. If you remember back in the day when you would go get boxes from the liquor store to move, it had those thick inserts in there, and now they're very, like 1 ply thick of maybe some cardboard in there. Some cases don't even have inserts at all to protect the bottles. So when it runs that conveyor, it can cause damage because it's running for 1 mile, that rattling on those rollers. And certainly when we have very humid nights, which are very common, it can damage the packaging. So the conveyor is a long-term need that causes us significant problems now. We do every year battle the need for stock pickers and forklifts and the batteries that go with those, because that is a constant need to replace those items. We try to keep those moving through standard replacement and through lease purchase. We can do that through some of the lease purchase money, which has helped us considerably. And then we do still have to do short-term rentals during the holiday time period so that we have enough. You have to have at least 2 batteries per pieces of equipment because 1 battery will not last for 2 shifts. So we have to have at least 2 batteries. So It is both, and I will tell you, in the last 6 months, one of our greatest need is people. It's people is one of our biggest struggles right now.
One of the things that I guess kind of to bring all that to a head is, are there any procurement issues that y'all have with the procurement laws as they currently sit that are a hindrance to functioning out there? Is there a better way of getting some of this equipment, or is it a time issue when something breaks down? I was told a story about a piece on the conveyor system broke, and they had to physically make it to fix it because they can't keep spare parts. They're not allowed to.
Well, our conveyor is essentially termed end of life, so a lot of the parts for it no longer are manufactured because the equipment, as with any type of equipment, your manufacturers only support things for a certain period of time, and then it's end of life. And so some of what we have with the conveyor is end of life, and so that creates an issue with being able to maintain or obtain the necessary replacement parts for it. And part of the issue, I don't know that I would say it's procurement laws as much as it is the ability to have a dedicated funding source for regular routine maintenance and replacement. We need to be able to have a 5-year plan for equipment replacement. We need to know that we have those funds available so that, I can plan each year. We can say, okay, this year we're replacing this year we're replacing this, and we know that we have the ability to do that. So that's part of I don't know that I would say it's procurement laws as much as it is having the necessary funding so that we can do cyclical replacement and plan for that.
Okay. One or two more questions. One, bailment. Basically, we're storing this for
Free.
the vendors for free. What are some of the other states? Do they have bailment fees? Is there some type of, what's the?
So the bailment fee would be a concept that belongs to your control states that have the warehousing where they're holding product, for the vendors in their warehouse. And so yes, most of the other control states have a bailment fee. We don't. We've attempted that a couple of times in the last, I'd say probably 7-8 years. The warehouse was actually built with a bailment fee in 1983. That's how it was paid for. And then once the warehouse was paid for, that bailment fee went away. I think it was 25 cents a case, if I'm not mistaken. Do you remember that? Only one. It was 25 cents a case when we built it in 1983.
And of course, the bailment fee could be a wonderful source for your routine maintenance or even, less routine capital expenditures that you might have with the building and be directly related to the product that's actually stored at the warehouse.
Okay. And you kind of touched on staff. As far as your full-time employees, how many full-time employees do you have in the warehouse that are that have been there a while? How much are temps? I noticed today that there were some folks from Madison County that were there that do a lot of the work that I guess when they closed that program down, those employees weren't able to make it, so people were kind of pulling double duty there. What's the employee situation in the warehouse specifically?
You want me to get that one?
Yeah.
Pardon me?
Do you have the pin count? We have 45 night shift workers, 35 day shift workers,
Right.
about 20 who do administrative office type work. We utilize, we have a temp staff that we retain through the bidding process that's supposed to provide us temp workers as we need them. We've routinely sought at least 20 temp workers per day from that temp agency. That temp agency, I think, primarily because of the things going on in the nation with the COVID virus, had a hard time meeting that demand, so we've actually entered an emergency contract with another temp agency to try to supplement those temps. That other company is also having a hard time finding temp workers who are not paid well, but they do make a pretty decent wage to work out there. And so from a short term, I think Meg mentioned this earlier, COVID and some of the relief payments, some of the extra benefits through workers' comp, some of the relief payments that have come directly to people, I think has affected our ability to retain workers. We've worked closely with the Department of Employment Security to try to identify folks who are coming in through their call center. We've worked through the State Personnel Board to try to identify folks who would apply. We have a sign that we've put out by the road asking to have people hire. I've told anybody who will listen, we're looking for 50 people right now. If somebody wants a job, we would hire 50 people who are able-bodied. We'd hire them this week if we can find them to help us increase our workload. So from an employee standpoint, we do we call them property officer trainees. We do have a fair amount of turnover in those positions. Like you would imagine in our management positions, I think we've done a little bit better job of retaining some of those folks, and we have a lot of good employees, but in some of our positions, we actually have a fair amount of turnover, and so replacing some of the employees has been difficult as well, which is why we turn to temps and other sources to help us fill in those holes.
And I would add to the Madison County, we have always used about 5 inmates from the Madison County facility. They help with cleaning and some, we do our own lawn care there, and mowing and weed eating and all that. So we do all of that in general repair to the building. And so they help us with that. And during the COVID pandemic, they were not allowed to go out for work. And so we just started getting that inmate labor back last week, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And let me just add real quick, I think it's interesting to talk about, I think there's fewer than 10 of the warehouse employees that have enough years in to retire. So you can see that there is a higher degree of turnover in those jobs than probably in just general DOR numbers.
Okay. I'm going to reserve the right to ask y'all probably some more questions later on after some of our other individuals get through speaking, because I'd like to get into kind of more of the discussion of what do we do going forward, and I want to hear what some of these other individuals have to say first before we start kind of diving into that, but I'll turn it over to Representative Lamar if he has any questions.
Yeah, I do have a few questions. Can y'all hear me? Is this on? Can you hear that? Thanks, Meg, for being here. Just a few quick questions. You mentioned we're going through some of the needs, and I was taking notes. Have y'all come up with an estimate as to what these needs, what the cost is with these needs?
We looked pretty good about 4 years ago at replacement of the conveyor systems. When that conveyor was bought, that was the standard, probably the standard for warehousing and distribution to run an operation like we have would be through that type of system. Today, that is not as common. We attend a trade show usually once a year, supported through the National Alcohol Beverage Control Association that we're a member of. And so we go to those and look at that. And so we would, if you replace that conveyor system, you would go to something more of a, like a pallet pick kind of system, where you would either through voice technology telling the picker which case to go to next or which location to go to next and how many cases of that to get. You could do it also through like a tablet that they would have, something maybe they could have on their wrist. They have those things. And so what they would simply be doing, instead of pulling cases that would go onto a conveyor, I thought my time was up, so I grabbed my mask to get my seat, so let me put it back down. They would basically be pulling your order, and then your order, and then your order entirely. And so kind of a completely unscientific guess, we would estimate that somewhere probably between $10 to $15 million to replace that and to do that. But certainly that could be done in stages. We couldn't just shut down the warehouse. You'd have to take the pick zones and take the A1 zone, for example, and maybe move that into a pallet pick kind of situation, and still run some conveyor as you're converting the warehouse. But outside of that, we generally spend, I would say, you probably need, like for forklifts and batteries and all, under $1 million gets you completely new stuff. I mean, probably $500,000 in that neighborhood, somewhere that, but again, that has to be,
At one time, or are you talking about yearly?
no, you would probably need a couple $100,000 yearly to keep that stuff through a cyclical replacement. Last year, we bought a couple of forklifts through lease purchase, and a couple of them we actually purchased with batteries and all, and we spent $100,000 just for that, and I think it was just a small percentage of what we used. We didn't replace everything, so you need to, and you don't need to replace everything every year, but you certainly need to be on like a 5-year plan where you're replacing them, because they don't last much more than a couple of years, because they're hard. I mean, they're used 20 hours a day.
What about, I know there's been some talk in the past, but specifically in recent years, about the need for a new warehouse or additional warehouse space. What about that? Is that still needed?
Yes, you please, go ahead.
The warehouse is outdated. There's some problems with the flooring. 10 years, we could probably make it with substantial renovations to the warehouse. 20 years, maybe pushing it. There's some thought that you could do a really decent improvement to the current warehouse, along with an expansion a little later on of the current warehouse. Of course, you'd have to price that versus what it would cost to buy a new warehouse and outfit it. And that, I don't think that's something we've done in the last couple of years, but that's certainly something that we would need to look at before we decided to completely renovate the current warehouse.
So we can't estimate that cost at this time,
I don't have an estimate for a new warehouse.
other than it's a need, but we just don't know a cost for it.
Correct.
Right.
If you would, if y'all could go to your handout, I had a few questions. I don't want to get too nerdy on the numbers, but the numbers of this are going to be very important as we look through this stuff. So could you, if you look at the second sheet of your handout and just spend a few more minutes, just take FY 2020, and let's go through these and just make sure that myself and everybody else truly understands what each number is, where the money's going, where it comes from. Just help us have a better understanding of that if you can.
Sure. If you look to the middle of the page, you can see the general fund transfers start at the general fund line and then go down through fingerprint fees. And then you can see the cities and counties amount, the Department of Mental Health amount, and the Department of Revenue amount. All of those amounts tie back into the same line items you have above. The amounts can be slightly different from what we collected and what we transferred due to timing issues, and so the numbers don't add up perfectly, but they're pretty close.
That was my question, because they're not adding up perfectly, and I'm wondering what the reason.
Yeah, they're primarily timing issues, and Meg Mike can speak a little bit more to that, but one of them is collections, actual receipts, and then the others are actual transfers to the different funds, and so the differences are primarily timing, I believe.
A perfect example of that would be, look at the sales tax that you see in the total collections line. That number is 29 million.
Yeah.
And if you look in the transfers, down in the other transfers, other funds, it's 28 million. And the example of that would be the collections is actually the month that we collected it from the permittee when we made the sale. And then the return is not due to the 20th of the following month. And so you have a 1-month timing difference between what you collect and then when you divert it to the fund where it goes. And so that's why you're going to have collections show one number for the fiscal year, but the transfers are actually a month different.
Okay, and so, for instance, the statutory markup, the 84 million, we've got 73.1 going to the general fund.
Correct.
Is the only reason for that difference, the money going to Department of Mental Health? Or
Those are the two different, yes, because part of it goes to general fund, part of it goes to mental health.
And then there will be a slight difference because of the timing issues, but the number will be pretty close.
What about the excise tax? Does 100% of that go to the general fund?
Yes.
Yes.
And the revenue, is this subject to the same similar split for cities and counties that regular sales tax is?
The
7%.
Department of Revenue sales tax?
Yeah.
No, it all goes to the, it doesn't, none of the wholesale sales tax goes to the cities. That's computed on the retail sales tax. So this Department of Revenue sales tax, there's a two diversions basically that it's going to go to. There's a 9.073 education enhancement diversion that's off the top of all sales tax, and a 2.266 education enhancement diversion that's off the top of sales tax, but the wholesale sales tax does not go to cities, excuse me.
Okay, I was referring to the retail sales tax. I'm sorry if I
It's,
didn't.
the retail
clear
sales
that.
tax is not shown on this sheet. It's only the wholesale sales tax.
Okay. Help the members understand that a little bit better if you can.
Okay. So what this is actually showing is what the ABC collected, and the ABC collects only the wholesale sales tax. And so that's what this number is. That's the sales tax that we collect, the wholesale tax we collect on sales to the restaurants and bars and package stores. And so we collect that, like for instance, in the month of September, we're collecting sales tax on all of those sales. It's a wholesale tax, the same rate, at 7%. And then we'll file that return. Actually, the ABC files a return to the Department of Revenue that it gets filed in October. So those transfers are going to be a month different, whereas statutory markup and excise tax gets transferred at the end of the month.
Okay, so let's, for example, let's say, you know, own a liquor store. You buy $100 worth of $100 case. That liquor store is going to pay 27.5% markup, and then it's going to pay an additional 7% wholesale sales tax.
Correct.
Okay? And then when they sell that product to the public, they're going to charge a 7% retail sales tax, take a credit for
The wholesale
difference.
tax.
Is that right?
That's correct.
So this number here is only showing the
The wholesale.
wholesale 7% sales tax.
Correct. Correct.
Where does the retail sales tax figure in, or does that just go into the general sales
It's
tax?
just, it's going to be in the regular sales tax statistics that are reported every month, just like we would report off restaurants and car dealers and department stores. There's going to be an industry code classification for package retailers or for restaurants, and that retail sales tax is reported at that level.
So that's not, the retail sales tax as it relates to liquor and alcohol is not kept separate than the regular general retail sales?
No, it is not. I mean, I can break it out for you, but it is not, it's treated just like any other sales tax.
So in looking at these numbers, let's say, help us understand this. Let's just say we decide, January 1, 2022, we're done with this, okay? What are we losing?
The statutory markup.
That's it? Okay.
The excise tax stays in place. And then you can actually leave the wholesale sales tax in place. That structure can stay in place, but you lose the statutory markup.
So
At the
84
roughly $85 million.
Again, that's just straight off the board, that part's gone, unless we change some type of tax structure.
Correct.
Everything else on here, depending on how we set it up, could survive, right?
Yes.
Because we've heard numbers of 120, 130, 140 million dollars, and we see those numbers, but that's not actually what we'd be losing, correct?
Yes, I would imagine that you could definitely have a structure in place where the excise tax stays, it would stay the same. And then your wholesale tax can stay in place as well.
All right, members of the committee, are there any questions? Representative Zuber?
Real quick, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Commissioner, you mentioned in your opening statement that you were thinking about making some changes to meet the increased demand. Please tell the committee what those changes are, please.
Well, we've already made a couple of the changes. We've added an extra day of shift, and we're trying to find employees to help us add an additional day. So we're working 4 10-hour shifts. We're trying to get our employees to work a 5th day. During some of the hottest days of the month, we were very happy to have the cooler weather come by, but we're also trying to find additional employees to help supplement those workers so that we're not working them all to death. And so the primary thing that we've done so far is we entered an emergency contract with a temporary staffing agency to help us identify some more employees so that we could add additional shifts to to our regular work schedule. We've made a couple of changes to our ordering system. Meg mentioned, and some of those changes were made before I came in. There's a case limit on how many cases you can order at one time. There's a case minimum on how many cases you have to order at one time, and that's to simply reduce the number of small shipments, and also try to have not just a couple of larger permittees order all of our products. So it's an effort to try to make sure that we can ship as much product, as many permittees as we can. There were some technical changes within our ordering system that we made, one of which was the ability to edit orders that we saw was being used by some permittees. They would go out and reserve whatever they could reserve, and it wasn't very many permittees. It was we identified a handful. They would then cancel those orders or revise those orders, drop some of the cases off, and those cases might get gobbled up really quickly by another group. And so we saw that as a problem, so we got rid of the edit order. People can still cancel orders, and that's another thing that we've evaluated a little along the way. Do we need to remove the ability to cancel an order? Because when you place an order, you go on the computer system and you build your order. You have a chance to review it and make all the changes you want to before you hit the submit button. And so after you hit the submit button, you can no longer edit that order, and then you can still cancel the order at this point. We have not seen as big of a problem with the cancellations as we did see with the edits. There was also another change that we were talking about. I have a hard time articulating. I'm going to let Meg articulate it. And we've examined pretty much every process at the warehouse. We're doing these things that we call drop shipments now, where if there's an order that has some very large quantities inside the order, we have an extra employee who's riding around helping fill those larger pieces of those orders, that's adding an additional set of cases that we can ship out every night in addition to the 19 or 20,000 that we already ship out. So we're kind of handling those as special orders if they're very large quantities of product, so that we can ship. It's basically getting an extra truck or so out every night. And then the other, I'm not sure if we've put the other change in place, but we're working on another change.
It should probably go up this week. I'm expecting that it will go up this week. What we have found with this pandemic buying, I mean, I kind of likened it to what happened with toilet paper early on. You know, whether you needed it or not, if you found it, you were buying like 2 or 3 cases, right? So, I mean, I think that's kind of what happened in the alcoholic beverage industry in Mississippi during this pandemic. And so early on, because we were seeing our case counts grow considerably, we put we capped it, and we said your permittees could only order 100 cases a day, because we wanted to be able to get product to all of our permittees, not just a handful that had the resources to maybe order 300 or 400 cases a night. You know, so we wanted to be able to make sure that everybody could get something. So we put a 100 case limit on orders early on, and that remains in place today. But what we have seen is, and Commissioner alluded to, we had some permittees that were kind of gaming the system, and if we got a delivery one day of a really, really popular product, say we got 300, 400 cases of it that came in that day, they would go ahead and gobble that order up, and because we were not doing next day shipping, we've gotten some days out from that. They didn't have to pay for it immediately. It wasn't going to ship the next day. So it gave them time to then edit that order and move it around and call a buddy and say, hey, I'm fixing to drop 50 cases of this if you want to go in and pick it up. And so we stopped that. And then what we have coming up this next week is the ability for us to place a limit on what you can order on an item for a given period of time. So if we get a delivery of a product that is very much in demand and we cannot keep it in stock, what we'll be able to do is to say, okay, you can only order 30 cases of this for a certain period of time. Each permittee we will limit the amount of cases. And so what we're trying to do is get more cases out every day, but we're also trying to do some things to stop some of the panic buying that we believe is still continuing today, because they're afraid if I don't order it, I don't know when I'll be able to get my next order, so I'm going to order the 100 cases today whether I believe I need it or not. And so they keep continuing to order and keep continuing to order and keep continuing to order. So Commissioner mentioned drop shipments. Today, for example, we'll ship about 19,000 just through regular orders tonight, but we'll be able to supplement that with 4,000 cases of drop shipments that we'll be doing. So that pushes our case count up each night. So during the week, we're doing probably, I would say, on average, 8 to 10,000 cases, an additional 8 to 10,000 cases each week through the drop shipment process. That does not put anybody back in line from where they were by us pulling out cases and doing them through drop shipment. It doesn't take the cases that you've ordered and give them over here, because when you get that order number, those cases are reserved for you. It's just if you ordered 20 cases of one item, I can easily pull that out and do it in a drop shipment, whereas you might have only ordered 1 or 2 cases of it, and it's not as easy for me to do it with 1 or 2 cases as it is to get a 20 case order to somebody. So that just supplements the number of cases that we can get out in one night.
Is that it? Okay. Senator Blackwell, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two quick questions. Are the warehouse workers under the personnel board?
Yes, sir, they are.
So you're kind of limited with the salary you can pay based on their classifications?
We have to operate within the restraints of the State Personnel Board system.
Do you think it would be beneficial if you remove those?
It certainly would not hurt us, and it would probably be very beneficial.
Do you have a better chance of recruiting employees?
I'm sorry?
You'd have a better chance of recruiting employees and retaining them?
I think any flexibility you can give agencies probably gives them an ability to be more flexible in their recruiting.
And do you know where you lie within the industry, warehousing industry of pickers, and are we in the middle of the group or real low?
You talking about salary ranges?
Salary ranges,
I don't
yes.
have that information. I'm not sure if Meg has it or not.
I don't have any actual statistical data to give you, but I can tell you in the past what we've looked at, we are relatively low. Till about 2 years ago, they made $19,206 a year, and that was, you know, before they took out the mandatory state retirement and insurance and all that kind of stuff. So, and now it's up to about 23. So we did move them up, but we're still probably on the lower end.
All right. And then just a question on the bailment. You said we had it, it went away. Was that a legislative action?
Yes, sir, it was. It was temporary for the purpose of building the warehouse.
So that's something that the legislature could possibly help correct for you, put a bailment fee in. You can use those funds for equipment and maintenance repairs.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Black. Senator Chasnall.
Thank you. I heard mention a moment ago of a wine room that was added. Can you tell me the specific purpose of that wine room?
It's climate controlled so that our finer wines can be in a climate controlled environment.
I'm asking because I took a tour of the warehouse last summer with a Hospitality and Beverage Association, and I noticed that there were Mogan David wines in the control room, and the Chandon was sitting out on a pallet in the heat, and I just wondered who was in charge of quality control and why the Mogan David wine was in the controlled temperature and the Chandon was sitting out on a pallet.
Most likely it has to do with space and when they arrived in the warehouse. But it should not be Mogan David in the climate controlled room.
All right. Senator Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bartlett, probably the biggest complaint that I get from liquor store owners is this 100-case maximum that they can order. And is that a function of a lack of supply, or is it a function of your lack of manpower?
It was put in place in April, I believe, was when we put it in place. So prior to COVID, we did not have a maximum that you could order in any given day, and it was put in place related to trying to be able to supply, to get them, not to supply, excuse me, so that we could get cases to every permittee, so that we would not have a smaller number of permittees that could monopolize the number of cases that we could get out in one day. So we put it in place to try to help to ensure that every permittee that needed to get an order could get an order.
So more a function of your lack of manpower?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And where are we now as it relates to manpower? You say you can hire 50 folks right today if you need to, Commissioner?
Yes, sir. It's my goal to hire about 50 more so that we can add extra days to our work schedule. We've had tremendous problems finding those individuals.
And what I'm hearing you all say, I think, is that, yeah, we need to tweak it. There's some issues that need to be addressed, maybe some additional space, certainly additional manpower, pay them more. But you don't favor privatization. Would that be an accurate statement?
I don't have an official position either way. We can certainly run the warehouse if the legislature, in its wisdom, decides that the Department of Revenue needs to run the warehouse. We can run it. It would be helpful to have some changes to help us better use our people, invest in some equipment, maybe some facilities. But if the legislature, chooses to have the Department of Revenue stay in the business, we can certainly run it and run it well.
And are you aware of any controlled states that have a privatized operation in that control environment?
You're talking about like a private company that actually runs the warehouse?
Yes,
There's
yes.
at least one state
There are a
that does
couple
that?
of them that have a third party actually operate the warehouse for them. So there are some of the control states that do contract out the operation of their warehouse.
Okay. And have you had any conversation or communication with other states that are having challenges meeting supply or having manpower issues?
Not in the last 6 months have we had those conversations, no.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Stevens?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this might be for Meg. Recently, I was in a package store near my hometown, and it's a friend's liquor store, package store, and Mr. Chairman, I was strictly buying wine for cooking purposes.
Of course.
But his complaint was like that day or that week he had placed an order, 10 cases of a product, and the warehouse tap was showing 1,800 cases in the warehouse or in stock. Well, his order was, he didn't get any. Then the following, he called and he said that he was told that it was not in inventory. Well, the next morning, 1,800 cases show back up on the tap. And that was his main complaint, is just in gearing up for the holiday season coming up, which I think COVID has been kind of an example of what Christmas and New Year's Eve will be like for y'all. I don't think my intake will be any more than it's been. But I think that, is anything, are y'all looking at anything geared up for the holiday season?
Let me, if I may address that first comment, without specifics, what I suspect happened is this: when we're doing these drop shipments, is that item, Meg's whiskey, whatever, I have to take that item and mark it as not available for sale, because what I'm doing is I'm removing cases off of your regular order and I'm creating a secondary order of just those cases. So while that item is being worked for drop shipments, which usually takes about a couple hours in the morning, but while that item is being marked for drop shipments, it has to be marked not available for sale. And so that's probably what they're seeing, is that there's cases there, but it's not letting me buy them, and then all of a sudden they're there, because I have to mark. And so without specifics, I'm guessing that may have been what happened with that. And so yes, we are concerned about the holiday time, because if all indications are that we're going to go into holiday with this ramped up sales volume, and so it will create an added burden for us during holiday. And we're trying to, as the commissioner indicated, we've gone to 5 days a week now. We're trying to add enough people so that we can possibly even add more to that.
And that was his big concern too. I think you turned to panic buying. He's wondering if he needs to do some panic purchasing to get
Please tell
prepared.
him no.
To get prepared for the
Right,
holiday
I understand,
season.
yes.
Senator Michelle.
On the bailment issue, I know you said that y'all are periodically changing the inventory because of items that are not popular. Isn't the bailment kind of a win-win in that you have the product there, so it's available, and if we charge the fee, then it might deter the shipping?
So bailment is a win for us because if the product's there, bailment orders, and I may not be understanding your question, but bailment orders are so much easier for us to manage than special orders. I mean, because the product's in there, you make the order, we send it out. So bailment is a whole lot easier for us. We have to have a limit on the number of products that we can have in bailment just because of space constraints. Our capacity is about 450,000 cases, and we will be at that during holiday seasons. I mean, we'll hit capacity in the warehouse during holiday season. So we try to make sure that what we have in bailment are the items that are the most popular and the most in demand. And so I guess maybe your question is, if I put a bailment fee on it, is that going to limit the number of items?
Could it be penny wise and pound foolish? If you put a bailment fee on it, could it deter the product from being available the moment the consumer needs it? And then could it also be a fee that the distributor would just add on to the price of the case and the consumer would end up paying it anyway?
Yes, it will, I'm sure, affect the price of the whiskey at the liquor store. I have no doubt that it will. But I don't believe that a bailment fee, if it's structured in the right range, will have any effect on the number of cases that we have in the warehouse. Because they need that product to be there too. The suppliers and the brokers, they need that product to be in our warehouse as well as much as we do.
I've got a question for you. I know how good you are running numbers from your time with the Appropriations Committee, but you mentioned the number of night workers, the number of day workers, 45 night workers, 35 day workers, total 80. Then you said 20 office workers. Would that be 100 or is it 20 inside included in the day worker category?
It's a total of about 100.
100.
Give or take a couple, but it's about 100.
So using revenue of right at $7 million, that's about $70,000 per employee average. Is that right? Did I miss something?
No, I think that's about right. Yes, sir.
70,000.
Yes, sir.
One follow-up.
Senator Horn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to Senator Chaznall's question about seeing fine wine exposed to the heat versus the Mogan David kind of sheltered. How do you make a distinction between fine wine and what's not considered to be such fine wine? And do you treat those wines any differently?
In general, it's probably going to be at a price point and the volume that we carry in the warehouse. So if it's, some of the wines are fast movers, and so if they're not going to be sitting there for any length of time and the volume of them that we would have to have in the warehouse, we don't have room in the wine room for every wine that we carry. But generally, it's going to be a price point that will probably determine whether or not it's a fine wine or a more everyday wine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on the bailment, Meg. You mentioned other states do have a bailment fee.
Correct.
Correct. So if we were to enact that, it wouldn't be anything unusual for them to experience. Is that correct?
No, sir.
And the inventory and bailment is done by the brokers. It's not done by the warehouse staff. Is that correct?
Correct. The brokers maintain their product, the products that they represent. They're responsible for maintaining the inventory that they have. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One question that I wanted to discuss is what we seem to be, I think the state of Washington was control and they went private. And from all accounts that I've heard, it's been not a pleasant experience for the state of Washington. Do you have any reference to that? Or you give any insight into why their privatization or what went wrong with their privatization or the issues they're having? Are you familiar with that?
You know, I've read some stuff on it, and I've heard some things at conferences. And in general, there was such a large tax increase that was put in place with the bill to privatize as a way to keep the state whole from losing its wholesaling operations, that it drove up the cost of alcohol considerably in the state. And it's not been, certainly, I think whatever side of the aisle you're on with that one, you can find an article or a study that kind of supports your position. But one of the things that I read recently was that the voters in the state of Washington, if given a chance to do the vote again, because it was for a ballot initiative, that they would not vote in favor of privatization because it seemed to have raised the cost of their products as well as the availability, the number of products that are available, because keep in mind, you know, we sell a lot of stuff at the warehouse. It's probably not a lot of high margins on it, and so you know, if you're in a privatized situation, you're not going to have all of that available.
Okay. One of the, gearing up for this hearing, I've had several emails from different groups and different people, and one of the complaints that I've come across, and it's kind of been, you know, consistent from different groups, is the delivery. I know we got, apparently there's a new delivery company. One of the things, it's not the actual company, but it's just the process. They're saying that they've had issues with either if it's broken, there's no leverage. They didn't hire the delivery company, the state did. They're delivering the product, and either they got breakage when it gets there, or the product's not even there. How are y'all handling issues with delivery, being that it's the state who has chosen the delivery agent? I know we got a new one, but obviously these are stories from that go back. It's just, I guess, a chronic problem that they deal with. Is delivery issues with breakage and just the product supposedly saying it's been shipped and they paid for it and it shows up and it's not there? Is that been pretty rampant, or is it just isolated?
I think it's isolated. When you ship 3.5 million cases in a year, you're going to have some breakage. You're going to have some product not show up. Of course, I've been on the job 9 weeks, but I've not heard anything that makes me think it's a systematic problem that's out of the ordinary. Meg might be able to elaborate on it, but I mean, we're shipping this year 4 million cases. 1% of that would be 4,000 cases, I think. And so I think our complaints are a lot lower than that.
Is there a method? Y'all have something in place to deal with these type issues?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
So the delivery company has the driver there at the trucks when we're loading them, and they sign off on the load that's put onto the truck. So if there is any damage in that load, once that product is placed on the delivery company's truck, it's their responsibility. Now, there is one, and so they are responsible for damage to that product, so claims for damage go through the delivery company. If the product is missing off the truck as opposed to being damaged, then the ABC does get involved, and we will do an inventory count of that product to make sure that we don't have if there's a case missing, that there's not an extra case in our inventory that just didn't get put on the truck. So we do check to make sure that the product is not in the warehouse through our inventory method, and if the product is not in our warehouse, then it falls back onto the delivery company. That's their responsibility.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a few follow-up questions. How much of your warehouse space is what we purchased versus bailment?
Oh, I would say 95% of the warehouse is bailment. We used to maintain a fairly robust select list of certain products that we would purchase, but we've gotten out of that business. So most of what we have is bailment. Very few state-owned products.
How do we determine what goes into bailment?
Currently, it's based off quota, and so if it's a spirits product and it sells over, has to sell over $9,500 worth of product, so then for it to be put into bailment, and then for wines, that's an $8,000 quota, and so that's what it is that it has to meet one of those. There are a couple exceptions to that we'll put something in bailment earlier than that. If it's like a line extension of something, we could put it in bailment. We've actually been given with the brokers lately because bailment orders for us are so much easier than special orders, and the process is easier for our consumers as well. And so we've been working with them to try to help them get some of what they believe to be some of the up-and-coming fast things to go ahead and get them in bailment ahead of that quota. But generally, it is a quota that allows them to get put in bailment.
I'm just thinking out loud, are there any other states that handle their bailment differently than we do?
I'm not aware of anything significantly different. Other states may have different levels of what they require for them to get in. They may require them to make a presentation before a committee before they'll be allowed to be put into bailment. There are certain states that you can only do bailment certain times of the year. You can have new products added to bailment, but it's pretty standard for the 17 control states.
Were there any other states that put the burden of the bailment back on the companies?
I'm not sure
I'm just trying to figure out why, help me understand the wisdom of why we spend money to own a government-owned, taxpayer-owned warehouse to house 95% of the space in there for private companies' product, as opposed to just ordering it from them?
Ordering it straight,
Yeah.
because you have to have the product in here because,
So it's just a convenience factor more than anything else.
well, it's that, and it also reduces the time frame to get things in. It's so much, you know, your suppliers, if you didn't have the warehouses need to be in the state for timely distribution, for one, but if you were trying to get it directly in, there is definitely economies of scale to be gained from shipping in to us 500 cases of one product as opposed to trying to ship 2 cases to you, 10 cases to you, 3 cases to you. So there's definitely economies of scale that can be gained from having the product in a centrally located area.
A few other questions, and then I'll be done, I promise. And I think I know the answer to this, but the cost to run the warehouse, does that come out of our ABC income, or is that dealt with in DOR's budget?
It is a line item in the Department of Revenue's budget.
Tell me about the other states around us. I assume we've had some time. I know you and I have talked about this in the past, but what does everybody around us do? First part of the question. Second part of the question is, how does our in-cost, retail cost compare to our other states around us?
So of our surrounding states, Alabama is the only other state that's a control state. Alabama does not do wine, their spirits only. And so they don't, some of my broker people here probably know this better than I do, because I've been having a hard time trying to figure out what their statutory markup might be to run their warehouse. It's not really widely published. But what I did find is that, and this seems kind of crazy, but that their effective rate on a gallon of spirits was $18.22 when you come in with their taxes as in addition to their warehousing fees and their, I guess, their statutory markup. Tennessee is a licensed state or an open state. Their spirits tax is $4.40 a gallon. Their wine tax is $1.21 a gallon. They also have a state sales tax, of course, that applies to that, and they have a liquor by the drink tax of 15%. Arkansas is an open state. They're $2.50 a gallon, like Mississippi. What I did find was also a 20-cent per case fee, as well as 75 cents a gallon for wine. They have some additional sales tax. They have a sales tax in addition to that. They have some additional taxes for on-premise and off-premise sales that range between 3% and 14%. Louisiana is, their rates are actually, I think, per liter, but when you convert it, it's $2.50 a gallon, like Mississippi. And they have a lower state sales tax, but they also have parish taxes that add to that as well.
All right, I was trying to keep up with that, but
I'm sorry.
help me, where do we stack up as far as our tax structure compared to the states around us? Are we?
So our actual excise tax is comparable. Where you get the difference is the fact that we have the markup as opposed to a private company having a markup to be the wholesaler in those states. And that information I cannot get.
Alabama, do they have a similar, since they're controlled?
Alabama is a control state, and I have been unable to find actually the dollar amount of their markup, but from what I did find, that their effective rate shows to be $18 essentially a gallon, and that's including all the additional fees that they put on for their control state operations.
No, our effective rate by the gallon?
Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 to $8.
A lot less in Alabama then.
Yes, sir.
Any comparison about, and I know private sector and all this factors, but just, you may not have a scientific answer, but are we generally cheaper or more expensive than the states around us, the end product?
I would say we're cheaper than Alabama, but we're probably, cheaper than Alabama, but more expensive than Louisiana, which are the two primary markets that we would be in competition with.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further questions, thank y'all, and obviously y'all will be here for the other people, everybody else's presentation, so we can follow up later on if we have any additional questions. Thank you, Meg and Chris. Next up is Herb Frierson, former Commissioner, Department of Revenue. Come on down.
Like I'm going to rob a bank with this mask on.
Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Appreciate the invite. I don't have a whole lot to say. I think the commissioner and the associate commissioner covered the subject very well for you right there. One point I just feel like I need to make on behalf of all the employees at ABC is they didn't create the problem that's out there. The managers that are running that warehouse did not create that problem. The associate commissioner didn't, the previous commissioner nor the present commissioner created that problem. The problem lies in the fact that it has not been properly supported. In 2012, Commissioner Morgan came into my office and said that the warehouse would be at capacity in 2018. The legislature was told that every year up to 2018. In 2018, I notified the legislature that we were at capacity during the Christmas season. You're beyond capacity now. As they told you earlier, the place was designed to ship 17,000 cases. Got way behind during this COVID pandemic. That really festered the sore, to put it in country terms. That really brought it out. What happened? Alabama shut down their state-owned liquor stores, and sales in East Mississippi went up. It was just a domino effect. Now I fear you're fixing to have another domino effect. I fear if we don't get something done and get something done pretty quick, you're going to see Louisiana and Arkansas sales go up. Because if I'm on a store in Mississippi or a restaurant, and I've got customers, good customers who've been dealing business with me for a long time, wanting something that I'm having to wait 2 and 3 weeks to get, I'm going to go get it for them. Just take the chance. I mean, it's been that goes on in New Hampshire quite regular. The taxes in Massachusetts and New York City are so high that people show up in New Hampshire in vans to buy liquor and bootleg back. That could very easily start happening here if we don't address the problem as soon as possible. I think you're 2.5 years away from a final solution. It would take, you'd have to, it's according to what route you go. If you decide, well, we're going to bond it, we're just going to do it the way it's always been done, that's fine and good, But then you're going to have a study done on what exactly it is you need and how much is that going to cost, and then you're going to have to bond it, and then you're going to have to build it, and that takes time. It takes time to do those things. Another option is you could change your lease laws and do a lease to purchase and have somebody just build you a brand new facility and change the laws to where ABC could enter into a 20-year lease agreement with somebody on a lease to purchase on a brand new facility and not create a debt service to the state, an increase to the debt. You could hire a private company to manage it, or you could totally privatize. And I wouldn't advocate the last. I'm just laying the options out there, what you can and can't do at this time. And, the problem's not going to be solved until the leadership of the legislature and the rank and file members have a goal that they want to accomplish. They have a vision that they want to create into reality. You got to come up with that before anything can be done. You got to decide what it is you want to do. And 4 years as commissioner, I guess the most frustrating thing when I left was that I left this festering sore, this problem. I was unable to solve it. I wish Chris and Meg all the luck in the world in the future in solving it, because there's people out there whose livelihood depends on this. There's some package stores, they don't make a whole lot of money. They eking out a living. And, you know, when they put in orders for a lot of stuff and just part of it comes in and, you know, their good customer finds out they can go somewhere else and get what they couldn't get or whatever, go to another state, and get it, they lose a customer, you know, and so it's affecting business. And that's probably the most disturbing part of it to me. And is that I believe there's a lot of people just barely hanging on, even though there's tremendous sales going on, because they never were a real strong store to start with. And there's a lot of those out there. I just want to reiterate, I think that the employees at ABC do a remarkable job. I think the fact that they're shipping 19,000 cases in a facility that was designed for 17,000 should tell you something. You know, somebody's doing something right. And whatever route you go to solve that problem, whether you go with a concessionaire or the state model or something in between or whatever you go with, you know, if any way I can help, let me know. And I'll be glad to help you. But my personal opinion is that I think y'all need to go to New Hampshire, Mr. Chairman, and look at that warehouse up there. It totally changed my mind about ABC warehouses when I went to New Hampshire and saw a warehouse totally different from ours that shipped twice as much liquor as we shipped and did it with a whole lot less people. And it was pretty remarkable to see that. And that what they have in New Hampshire, they have a state control system just like we do, except they have a concessionaire that runs the warehouse for them. So does Ohio, so does the Providence of Alberta. There's a group in Arlington, Virginia, that y'all can use as a great resource, and that's called the National Alcohol Beverage Control Association. Now, they're not a lobbying group, so they're not going to come down here and freely provide you with information, but through MEG and the commissioner, you can get some unbelievable information from them about what's going on in other controlled states. Mississippi has the second lowest markup. West Virginia has the lowest. I think there's 21%, right? Mississippi's 27, I believe. So we're pretty competitive on the markup with all the other controlled states. Now, how that stacks up against open states, I don't know. You'll have to ask the open warehouse people how much they charge in markup. But it's not that you're running out of time. You've run out of time. It's really time to do something. That's all I wanted to emphasize.
Thank you. Are any questions for former Commissioner Frierson?
Herb, thanks for coming today. You mentioned it, New Hampshire. What do they do differently up there than what we do? How do they run their warehouse?
They have a contract with a company that runs it for them, that built the warehouse and runs it for them. And I'm not sure how they pay them. I don't know if they pay them through an appropriation or if they retain a percent of the revenue they generate. I mean, it's half dozen, same thing. They're not under the personnel board, and they're not under the procurement laws of the state. And that makes them a whole lot more efficient in their operation. They pay their warehouse workers by the amount of work that they do. The highest paid person in that warehouse is a lady. I met her when I was up there. She was remarkable about how much she could pick and deliver to be shipped, to the dock for shipping. It was just remarkable how much more she did than anybody else in that warehouse. And they probably got an ABC type category where when you're hired, you'd come in C as probationary. You got 6 months to advance to a B. And if you don't make it to a B in 6 months, you lose your job. But once you make it to B, you got a safe job, and you really want to make more money, you got to advance to A. And they do stuff like that, which creates a lot more productivity. They had a whole lot less damages than we had. But part of our damages is based on our conveyor system in the fact that the industry has put stuff in flimsy boxes, and the flimsy box comes apart on the conveyor, and then the bottle busts, another bottle busts, and every box that goes over the wet rollers, they start busting. So it creates, Well, they don't have that problem because they don't have any conveyors. They're doing all voice to pick. The computer's saying, go to aisle such and such, go to bin number such and such. Get, 5 cases of Jack Daniels, and they got one of those little zapper guns, and they zap that, put it on their little cart, take off, and go from one place to the other like that. So they reduce a lot of damages by doing it that way. It's just a different. I think y'all ought to go look at not just New Hampshire's warehouse. Go to New Orleans, look at Sazerac's, the one in Metairie. Don't they have one in Metairie? A big one? Somebody does. You got an official here from Republic National. They got warehouses all over the country. You might want to talk with him. Go look and see. I think you need to know what it is you want to do and how much it costs before you do it. You need to have that goal. And I'm going to say this. I'm trying to think of a real diplomatic way to say it. It's very obvious
Start now.
that the legislature hasn't had the time and the desire to work with the warehouse in the past. History points that out. We wouldn't be here talking about all the problems today. And a great solution would be that if you went with a concessionaire and you let them retain a % of the revenue they generate, and then y'all not bothered with that problem anymore. Y'all can move on and deal with educational issues and healthcare issues and transportation issues and the things that you really came here to work on. That's my 2 bits, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Herb, you have a question? Okay. Thank you. Next, Mr. Gerard Gibbert is going to talk about the Mississippi Lottery Corporation and the entity they had to set it up, and whether or not this may be an opportunity for us here. Obviously, we're trying to get all the options on the table and discuss, like former Commissioner Frierson said, any opportunity we have to make things better. So, Gerard, thank you for being here today, and the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I thought you said the Mystery Lottery Corporation and not the Mississippi Lottery Corporation. The Lottery Corporation is kind of a unique entity with respect to its role and position in the state government. It is mostly a private corporation, but it was established by the Lottery Act, and there are some parameters that govern the way it is governed. For example, the payout of lottery winnings has to be at a minimum 50%. But the Lottery Corporation is more of a private entity, and it would be a contrast to just a privatization through a concessionaire, through a contract. So just to make that point, that's a little bit of a different operating model. The governor appointed board members, of which I am one, of the Lottery Corporation, and so it, again, more aligns with a private entity where there's a board responsible for governance, but all of its staff are employees of the corporation and not of the state of Mississippi. And so in that regard, it is not bound and limited by state personnel statutes. And one of the key aspects there, I think, is the fact that the Lottery Corporation can pay bonus pay, has incentive pay, that it can offer and hire employees under such a goal. And I think that's been critical to the operations of the lottery. There's just under 90 employees total in the Lottery Corporation. Much like what we're talking about here with respect to alcohol distribution, it is a revenue-generating entity. In the situation with ABC, it seems a little unique in that it is part of the Department of Revenue, but it is both the Department of Revenue itself is both a revenue-collecting entity, and in this case, it's a revenue-generating entity, which is kind of an interesting contrast. The Lottery Corporation is a revenue-generating entity. 100% of its net profit, known as net proceeds in the lottery realm, are the possession of the state of Mississippi citizens. So when you look at the Lottery Corporation's balance sheet, there's no equity on it. On a monthly basis, as you know, the full scope of all the profit generated by the Lottery Corporation in that month is transferred to the state treasurer, and then by statute, the treasurer distributes that money accordingly. The Lottery Corporation is bound by an expense threshold in which no more than 15% of its expenses, 15% of revenue can be in the form of expenses in the corporation. So it does have two major limitations there. Also, as former Commissioner Frierson said, it is not bound by state procurement. One of the first things that we did as members of the board is we promulgated procurement rules that somewhat align with state procurement, but I think also gave us a lot more latitude. It does, however, stipulate that any procurement of $1 million and up must be done through a full scope RFP. And the very first procurement we did, of course, was to hire legal counsel, and that was done through a full scope RFP. I think there are a lot in government that believe you cannot hire lawyers, frankly, through RFPs. I'm here to tell you that's not true. You can, and we did it. So we hired accountants in that regard. We hired other professional services as well. The Lottery Corporation received no taxpayer funding, so it does not submit a budget per se to the state of Mississippi for funding. It does submit that as part of its obligation under the Act, but it does not do so and request money. It is a self-sustaining entity, 100%. You might ask, well, how do you fund the operations of the lottery without having any revenue, which was the case for us for about a year and 3 months to be exact? Well, that was through traditional bank financing. So that's something else that's a little bit different. The Lottery Corporation, as a private entity, sought via RFP financial partners for its seed funding. And I think it was a $5 million loan, which we then paid off. I think we've paid it off entirely at this point, and that was all part of the plan. It is interesting that because we didn't have any revenue for a period of time, that we had a limited field of respondents to the banking RFP. That was kind of a surprise. In this case, you've got an entity that's already operating that has a history of producing revenue and profit. Just as you have a statutory markup, in the case of a private entity, perhaps there is either no statutory markup or maybe there's a floor, maybe there's a ceiling, so it operates within a range. And then the question is, should there be taxes? Well, you could certainly, the revenue streams, as it was discussed here earlier today, I think you'd have to admit are fairly complex. It's convoluted. Is that right, Representative Lamar? Based on the questions you asked, which were relevant questions, that seems to be the case. The Lottery Corporation is real simple. It just has revenue, it has expenses, it has profit, and whatever that profit is, it sends a check to the state treasurer. It's pretty straightforward. And that's a little different than a contract with a concessionaire, as Commissioner Frierson talked about. So it is a self-sustaining, wholly private entity, with the exception of some of those parameters and guidelines that are outlined in the Act.
How has the forming of the Lottery Corporation in our lottery system in the state of Mississippi, I mean, obviously we were late to the dance. We were, what, 46th, 47th to the Powerball.
There are 5 remaining. Yeah, we were, exactly.
What kind of response have y'all received based on the way you went about setting up the Lottery Corporation and actually getting into day-to-day operations? And has it flowed well? Has that been a good setup?
Yeah, it has. And of course, obviously one of the first, or the first hire we had to make was of a president of the corporation. And honestly, had we been bound, I think, by state personnel policy, I don't think we would have gotten the quality individual that we got. Now, our president's compensation is $250,000 a year. Just for argument's sake, the highest paid in the country is Tennessee. It's $1 million a year salary to run the Tennessee lottery. So California, on the other hand, which is a complete publicly operating lottery, generates about $11 billion a year in lottery sales, and the director of the lottery makes about $175,000 a year. Well, they've had all kinds of problems if you've been keeping up with impropriety problems within the lottery. And I'm not suggesting that's natural, but or a done deal, but in our case, being able to hire the best candidate for that position and not having the constraints of state personnel policies. And the same is true for the other key positions as well, from HR director to director of sales and operations and accounting. All those are key positions, and also having the ability to institute a fairly comprehensive bonus program, not only for the president and key executives, but throughout the entire company. So it operates, again, much like a private company would, where people are incentivized to perform well and get paid for it.
If there was any part of this setup that you would change, having this type of entity to do this, is there anything that you would recommend to do differently?
You know, Senator, I don't honestly think there is, and I can tell you that when I was first approached by the governor about this position, well, the first question I asked is, does this organization receive any sort of taxpayer funding, and is it going to be a public sector or a private sector entity? And when I learned that it was going to be the latter, a private sector entity, and would receive no taxpayer funding, that was really the impetus for me to accept the appointment. I can't think of anything at this point. It should also be noted that sales of the Lottery Corporation are about double what we projected. So we just didn't know at the time, and we're trying to extrapolate based on similar sized states such as Arkansas. But heck, we're on a run rate to produce about $500 million in the first complete year, and we estimate about $275 of gross revenue. So we've already transferred the first $80 million that is earmarked for the State Highway Fund. We've already hit that bogey as of August. So, and that's with 4 months left.
Good deal. Are there any questions from the committee?
Carter, you may not be aware that, are you aware of any state in the country that runs fashion the way your lottery corp is set up?
I'm not, and I was listening with interest about what's going on in Washington and then New Hampshire. Sounds like sort of two different approaches that are different in that they are not fully public sector entities. I'm not, but I got to tell you, Trey, I can't see why the same model couldn't work here. I thought through that quite a bit before coming down here. Again, appointing a board, I think, and letting the board deal with this instead of you guys dealing with this, and letting the board and management deal with these day-to-day issues. When you hear about warehouse problems and the need for capital expenses and problems with conveyors, and those are real world problems in the private sector and certainly in the logistics industry. And as you guys are probably aware, there's just a host of innovation and new technology to the point where, frankly, the need for staff in that warehouse with the implementation of new AI-based and robotic systems in logistics, you could probably cut the staff dramatically. I'm sure that's what the concessionaire did that Commissioner Frierson was talking
Speaking
about.
of that, I'd appreciate your insight on, and I know this is spur of the moment, putting you on the spot, but so help us think through or give us your insight on similar quasi-government corporation versus just having DOR contract, issue an RFP for a 20-year contract with some private company to come run the thing. What is there really ultimately any difference there? Maybe, I guess it depends on how the contract's drafted to what control the state maintains over it, but give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things is what the term of that contract would be an issue, because you could leave money on the table in a contract. If it were a private entity where essentially, however you structure that, but if it's like the lottery where all the profit that drops out is the profit to the state, that's a little different situation. And of course, you've got the classic, rather than having a statutory markup, and then all the other layers of fees and taxes, excise taxes and prepaid sales taxes and all that other stuff on top of that, if you just simplified that, maybe that's a better model where the people running the place are just concerned about finding the optimum price point. I don't know about the elasticity of demand of alcohol. I've never really studied that when I was studying economics in school, but I suspect there is some fluctuation in demand based on fluctuation of price. And just let them figure that out.
So we can best compare, help us understand what your costs are. I assume you got employment costs, personnel, but, you know, if you were running this on a liquor model, you would have obviously the cost of buying the product. So what are y'all's costs?
Yeah, and so you've got the above-the-line costs and the below-the-line costs, as you indicated, and so the cost of product, which would be a cost of sales, which would figure into gross margin, that's a little different. In the lottery model, the financial model, prize winnings really are more the cost of sale. And again, the state does dictate that that has to be a minimum of 50%. I'm honestly not sure why that's in the law, because if we paid out the minimum, our sales would shrink dramatically. We're currently paying out, I haven't looked at it in a couple of months, but it's nearly high 60%. That's pretty standard across the industry. So that's kind of an above the line cost. Below the line, you're right. It's people, mainly personnel costs. We've got office space. There's rent involved in that. There's the more classic expenses of insurance and legal and accounting. I should also point out, from an accounting perspective, the lottery, I think, may be the only entity in the state that does submit to 2 audits, financial audits, both the state auditor and a private audit firm, complete audits of our financial statements. I'm not sure there's another entity in the state that undergoes dual audits like that, and that's in accordance with the law. But it's those sorts of expenses. But the below the line expenses, you're right, it's primarily personnel costs. Obviously, we're not very capital equipment intensive. That's probably a difference, I would think, with respect to alcohol distribution. You're talking about conveyors and machines and delivery mechanisms and so forth. That sounds like a fairly capital intensive. I would also say that probably lends itself more to a private sector mode of operation.
How many employees do you have?
Just under 90, I think. And also note that a number of those work outside the office. So their job is to call on our retailers. We have about 1,800 retailers, just under 1,800, which is way more than we thought. We thought we'd have about 1,200 based on Arkansas. We kind of looked at them for guidance. And their job is to call on those retailers and make sure that the Lottery Corporation is servicing them adequately, that they don't have any issues with the systems, they understand the games, they understand their contractual obligations, and any sort of financial anomalies that might crop up, which are frankly very few. It works real good.
You kind of hit on this earlier. You know, there are some that would have, say, government needs to get out of the way, get out of this business. It's not a core function of government, and I tend to agree with that generally, but there's very few parts of government that make us $11, $12 on the dollar.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's the challenge we have here. But you consider the Lottery Corp government, or is it along the lines of you know, private business here in the state?
Yeah, as you could probably guess, the latter. There's not a lot of government entities that, for example, are buying billboards out on the most driven roads in the state to get you to spend money. We do a lot of feel-good advertising, for example, through the Department of Transportation to make sure people stay safe, as an example. But in the case of the lottery, you think about, it's a sales organization. I mean, and to a great extent, so is the sale of alcohol and spirits to retailers. It's a sales organization. It's a similar model in that respect.
I'm trying to figure out if we were to go this route with ABC, are we growing government, or are we growing the private sector economy?
I would argue the latter. You know, the state still has, since I don't think the state has any interest, and I'm just guessing here, of opening up liquor distribution to anyone that wants to be in the liquor distribution business. I assume the state still intends to be in that business. The Lottery Corporation is unique in that it cannot have any competitors. But it also has, think about how that's kind of overcome. It's through the business model. So you have a board of directors who are not compensated, as you know, but you've got a president and staff who are compensated based on sales and profitability. So they have a built-in financial incentive not only to service the retail customers, but to find that optimum price point and also be creative. I mean, it's a creative endeavor. It's something I'm not sure that sales of liquor has to deal with that much, but you got to keep people, you could argue there is some degree of that, but certainly in lottery sales, you know, where the folks are constantly monitoring sales volume of certain games, and when they get to a certain point, they have to pull those games and get creative and replace those with new games. You've probably seen that, and they do an excellent job at that. So there's the creative private sector aspect of that to keep people interested in playing the games.
Any members? Representative Zuber?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I should probably know this, but how do y'all decide the price of a lottery ticket?
Yeah, it's, Representative Zuber, thank you for that question. It's actually based on a lot of input and analysis from the primary gaming vendor. A lot of their experience with games in the other states. So the good news here is I've said so many times, the bad news is we were 45th to get the lottery. The good news is we got 44 others to tap into for best practices. So a lot of it comes from that, and that's where and again, if the games aren't priced right and if the payout is not structured right, people don't play the games. And if they don't play the games, you don't generate any revenue. If you don't generate any revenue, you don't have any profit, and all the people that work at the corporation don't get their bonuses. I mean, it's just simple as that.
The Lottery Corporation is set up so where the board has discretion to fluctuate the price and decide that price point based on other states, number of sales, so on and so forth.
It does, and technically speaking, the board, in accordance with the law, does have purview over that, but in reality and from a practical perspective, we don't get involved in that on a daily basis. We would, obviously, if we showed up at a board meeting and the monthly financial statements showed a severe dip in both revenue and profit because winning payout was too high or the structure of the games wasn't generating enough revenue. But thus far, frankly, that hasn't been a problem. I would also note that much as has been discussed today, certainly during the initial weeks of the pandemic, it sounds like the demand for alcohol was quite high. The demand for lottery tickets, surprisingly, was quite high as well. There's about a 4 or 5 week period in there where up to that point, our average had been about $10.5 million of revenue per week, and we were north of 13 million during that period.
Thank you.
It's back down to about 9.5 now. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Gerard, thank you very much for your time. Next, we have Mr. Dawson Hobbs, who is with the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America. Dawson, thank you for braving the friendly skies and flying into Jackson to come speak with us today.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Chairman, and other members of the committee. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to come and testify on this, what I think is a very important issue. I'm Dawson Hobbs. I'm the Executive Vice President of Government Affairs for the Wine and Spirits Wholesalers of America. We are the trade association that represents wine and spirits wholesalers, large and small, across America. Founded in 1943, we have more than 350 member companies in 50 states and D.C. Our members distribute more than 80% of all wine and spirits sold at wholesale in the United States. Across the country, wholesalers employ more than 87,000 people who receive nearly $8 billion in wages. I'm here because my understanding is you've been tasked with studying whether Mississippi should make changes to its beverage alcohol system. The question of privatization is complex, and make no mistake, Mississippi's current system might have challenges, but it is a well-established and strong system of regulation similar to that successfully used in the 17 control states. I'm here to shed a little bit of light on the differences between your system and what a privatized system might look like, and what the role wholesalers might be able to play in that system if you make a decision to make changes. As a control state, Mississippi is one of the 17 states that controls at least one of the 3 tiers of alcohol distribution. Either in many control states, they will act as either the distributor and or the retailer of beverage alcohol. In the other 33 states, which are referred to as licensed states, private companies operate the both distribution and retail functions of the alcohol marketplace. Thinking a little bit about the history of the three-tier system while considering this task in front of you, it's important to understand that privatization should not mean deregulation, and that continuing an effective form of regulation for the alcohol marketplace is important. The three tiers in that marketplace are producers, those who manufacture wine, beer, and spirits, wholesalers and distributors, those who take it from the producer to the retailer. In the case of Mississippi, you'd be that. And then retailers, including stores, restaurants, package stores, whatever outlets are allowed to sell the product. Under the three-tier system, these are distinct functions. Producers can sell the products only to wholesalers, wholesalers sell it to retailers, and retailers to consumers. It was designed at the end of Prohibition to prevent one tier from dominating the marketplace and exerting undue influence over other members of the industry or consumers, which was a real problem in the pre-Prohibition era. The three-tier system in America creates the clearest system of regulation, provides regulators with a traceable and verifiable chain of custody that ensures efficient tax collection and creates a fair and competitive marketplace while maintaining the widest variety of consumer choice in the world. Talking about that middle tier, the wholesaler role in both licensed and control states, is what I'm here to do today. America's wine and spirits wholesalers are family-owned businesses. Many of them are entering their fourth generation of ownership. In states where wholesalers operate, they deliver to every retailer in every town, large and small, hotels, bars, restaurants, package stores, any other alcohol outlet. They're engaged in their local communities. They contribute to charities, sponsor local events, provide good-paying jobs for those 87,000 employees. They're strong, active members of the communities in which they could do business. While a full examination of what wholesalers do would take much more time than we have here today, I'd like to provide you a little snapshot of the operational differences between a control state and a licensed state. Currently in Mississippi, the state handles the warehousing and sale of alcohol to retailers. But wholesalers in Mississippi operate as brokers, which is a liaison between the producers and the retailers. Each alcohol producer will assign their products to certain wholesaler brokers in the state. The wholesaler doesn't take title to the product or warehouse it or deliver it, but they educate retailers about the product, conduct educational tastings for bar and wait staff, provide localized data trends, work with restaurants to create wine lists and specialty cocktails, and help create marketing campaigns and branding. All of these services to retailers help the retailers thrive in the marketplace. They also benefit consumers because it brings a vibrancy and excitement to on and off-premise retail establishments and the entire consumer experience. However, since the wholesaler does not place orders on behalf of the retailer purchases directly from the state. Once the product is ordered, the wholesaler gets its pay directly from a producer based on the amount of product sold in the state that they represent. This is significantly different than what happens in licensed states. In licensed states, wholesalers still provide these essential marketing services for producers to restaurants, retailers. They help grow new brands, but they also purchase the brands, take title to them, warehouse them, deliver the orders to the retailers. In this role, wholesalers are uniquely valuable to the marketplace as they provide efficiency, marketing, and competition. While delivering a case of spirits to a retailer might sound simple, in reality, it's a very complicated process. The average wholesaler warehouse in a licensed state contains approximately 7,000 SKUs of product. That stands for stock keeping unit if you're not in the consumer goods industry. And that's if you think about the little UPC code on the back of a product, each one of those is an individual SKU. In a larger market like a Texas or a California or Florida, a wholesaler warehouse can have 15,000 SKUs available to retailers within it. A large retailer might order an entire pallet of a product, while smaller retailers order one or two bottles of a lower volume product. Through decades of expertise with millions of dollars in warehouse technology investment, wholesalers process these diverse orders and provide fast and efficient delivery throughout the state. The role of wholesalers also creates a clear chain of custody from supplier to wholesaler to retailer to consumer, because all products sold in the state must go through that wholesaler. This accountability is the primary reason that the United States does not have the same problems with black market products, tainted alcohol, and product diversion that proliferate in so many other countries. Importantly for the state, wholesalers act as tax collectors in licensed states. They collect the state and local excise tax when they sell the product to retailers, and they remit those taxes to the state, providing the state with a very finite number of tax remitters that are easily audited and taxes that are easily verifiable. This role provides an efficient and cost-saving system for the state, and while each state sets its own rates of sales and excise tax, both control and licensed states are able to derive similar net revenue relative to their population size. The last point I'd like to make today is while every state has beverage alcohols that are individualized to take into account regional and local attitudes towards alcohol, there are 6 fundamental components that are critical to maintaining a successful regulatory system. Very briefly, I will touch on these, and if you'd like to elaborate any further, I'm available for questions at any time. The first is to ensure that the products move properly through the tiers. Producers can only sell to wholesalers, wholesalers can only sell to retailers, and only retailers can sell to consumers. The lack of a 3-tier system would open the door for a supplier to retail channel, a retail to retail channel that would benefit only large chain businesses. Prices would likely increase, innovation would decrease, consumer choice could be limited, tax revenues could decline, and state regulatory expenses will increase. Ultimately, jobs would be lost throughout the marketplace. The second fundamental concept is ensuring that wholesalers purchase alcohol from only the product's actual manufacturer. Referred to as primary source laws, this requirement establishes a chain of custody that can be quickly traced by state regulatory agencies and removed from the shelf in the event of a question about its integrity, as well as preventing diversion of the products to black markets. The third concept is require that a wholesaler keep all product brought into the state in its warehouse for a certain period of time. This varies across the licensed states, but this so-called at-rest requirement ensures a clear separation between the producer and retailer and ensures legality of products is verified and facilitates the proper payment of taxes. The fourth concept is fair credit sales laws that prevent large retailers from using their superior market position to demand more favorable credit terms and longer payment periods. The fifth concept is requiring that all taxes manufactured, imported, sold, delivered, or purchased within the state are collected by the wholesaler and remitted to the state. That allows that very efficient, auditable tax trail for the state. And the sixth is the concept of ensuring that no single retail entity dominates the marketplace. Many states do this by limiting the number of retail licenses a single entity can hold, or limiting it based on geography or population. Again, I'd really like to thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. Happy to answer any questions. The earlier speakers did a really great job of talking about the Mississippi system. I think this has been a really good meeting. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dawson. I appreciate it. One of the things that, so I guess your group doesn't necessarily advocate for control or license.
No, we have members that operate in both, for instance, in Mississippi as brokers, and we have members that operate in states like where I live, in Virginia, where it's control for spirits but not for wine. We don't advocate in favor of one or the other. Both can be very effective. We do think that if states are making changes to their system, either system, they should be well thought out.
Well, then let me ask you your thoughts and opinions on the state of Washington, since that seems to be the state that everybody likes to talk about. What exactly, in your estimation, if it did go wrong, what went wrong?
The biggest issue with Washington is that was a privatization measure that was done by a ballot initiative, and not through a thoughtful legislative process. And as a result, the ballot initiative was written by and supported, frankly, by one group of retailers that wanted the privatization process to benefit them. And it had some elements in it that I think were very harmful. Because it was a ballot initiative measure, it also had to be revenue neutral, which is what, as they referenced earlier, required what is now the highest spirits taxes in the country, in the state of Washington. Other elements of that I think were harmful, for instance, to get a license to be a spirits retailer, your store had to be at least 10,000 square feet, which essentially eliminated many of what would have been the small, independent, private spirit stores. And so you had a real shrinking of the marketplace to only those largest retailers that frankly carry a more narrow band of products. And then for the state to be made whole, taxes were very high.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions? Go ahead.
See if you can comment on this for me, and these are hypotheticals, I get it, but that's kind of what we're here for, is to discuss the hypotheticals. So, if Mississippi decided to pursue the privatization route, realistically, based on your experience in this market, what could the state expect? In other words, what additional businesses are coming in here? I mean, are the so-called the Big Four all going to come compete for this job in Mississippi for warehouse space? I mean, we're talking about throwing some names: Southern Glazers, R&DC, Gallo, United, Johnson. There may be some others. All those guys come to Mississippi?
Yeah, I doubt that all of them are going to come to Mississippi. If you look across the country, generally what most licensed states have is 2 to 3 very large wholesalers that handle, a significant portion of the marketplace. But then there is a long list of smaller niche wholesalers that serve very specific parts of the market. And that list is actually growing. There are more wholesalers in the United States now than any time in the last 30 years. And it's really because the developments in the marketplace and in the products, you have these, for instance, you'll have a niche wholesaler who carries nothing but Italian wines and services Italian restaurants, right? And they don't make tens of millions of dollars, but they have a very nice profitable business, and they have a dozen or so employees, and they really target the market. Though especially now with the growth of craft spirits across the country, there's a number of smaller wholesalers that specialize in those products. You will definitely have 2, maybe 3 very large wholesalers that would invest in warehouses, either refurbishing an existing warehouse, retrofitting it, or building a new warehouse, staffing those warehouses, having the accounting staff, all of those things, having delivery drivers, having trucks. But you would also have a host of smaller wholesalers who would come in and service, very specific parts of the market.
What I'm trying to figure out is, something that's very important to me, and what I feel is some of our maybe most important job is to encourage our private sector growth, private sector economy to grow in the state. The only way we're going to get off the bottom in some of these bad categories. But that said, what we're looking at here is kind of an odd duck situation, where you have a sector of government that makes a tremendous amount of money for the state. One might think, well, the government shouldn't be in this business. Just let the private sector handle it. But you have to take into account the money that comes in, and we've been set up and doing this, and as you even testified, Mississippi's been doing it fairly well, I think you said. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to figure out is if we got rid of that, what can we expect by way of jobs, to come into the state? And I'm trying to back into
right. I couldn't give you a number off the top of my head for the state of Mississippi. The closest thing I could do, and I don't have this again off the top of my head, but I could certainly follow up with you, is look at how many jobs wholesalers employ in states of similar population, in Arkansas and Oklahoma, that are licensed states. And that would probably give some estimate of what it would need to service the marketplace here.
Get us that information?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I will get it to you, but it is also, if you have time and you're interested, if you were to go to our website, we have an economic analysis. You can look at every single state in the country of both total industry jobs and wholesaler jobs, but we'll follow up and get you, some comparable states directly.
If you could do that, that'd be great. And then a kind of a follow-up question. In those states, that are licensed states, can you give some examples of, I assume they have a different tax structure. They don't all have the same tax structure. Can you give us some examples of what that looks like?
They do have different tax structures, and I'll say that there's a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison when you look at tax structures, because states set up their tax regime sometimes for different purposes. And, just looking at control states as an example, there was talk here earlier of New Hampshire. New Hampshire views their control system really as a revenue generator, and they very aggressively market their products to citizens in other states, and as was referenced, get people from Massachusetts and New York to drive across the border and buy products. If you contrast that with Utah, for example, which structures their markup and tax system and their sales system really to limit the access to alcohol, because their societal views are they want to limit consumption. And so despite the fact that those are both control systems, they're managed to achieve different goals. The same thing is true in licensed states. And there are other factors that affect revenue, for instance, the number of outlets that are allowed. Some states allow wine, beer, and spirits to be sold in grocery stores, for instance. Some states restrict it to a limited number of package stores. Those are going to impact the revenue numbers as well.
One other quick question. You mentioned Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's private for wine, control for spirits. Is that right?
Yes.
Explain that system for us.
So in Virginia, wine is handled, I guess the best example is the way beer is here, right? It has independent distributors that buy from the wineries and sell to all the wine outlets. In Virginia, wine is generally available pretty much everywhere that beer is. So a lot of the distributors do handle both wine and beer in their houses separately, but they will handle both. Spirits is done much the way that wine and spirits are done here in Mississippi. They have a central warehouse in Richmond. One difference is in Virginia, the state of Virginia actually operates all of the retail outlets for spirits. So all of the stores throughout the state, what we call ABC stores, are actual state employees and are managed by the state.
Is there a state that you know of, you're aware of, that went from control to private, that did it seamlessly and had a good experience?
The only state I am aware of that made the change is Washington. So any change, I've been in this industry for 15 years. Any change that happened would have been well before that and well before the memory of anybody that I've worked with. So.
Okay. So you're saying ballot initiatives are tricky?
Yes. I would say Oregon, for several years in a row, tried to do it via ballot initiative, and through a variety of reasons, they weren't successful. Ballot initiatives are not, in my opinion, the way to create a regulatory structure for alcohol.
Never mind, I was going to ask you about another product, but I digress.
Happy to talk ballot initiatives later if you'd like. So,
are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you. I very much
here.
appreciate it. If anybody has any further questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Will do. All right, and next, Mr. Browning, I believe, is going to be speaking on behalf of our guest that could not make it today since we had to change the timing of it. But Mr. David Warner, the Distilled Spirits Council, was planning on being with us, but he sent some information, and Steve's going to give it to us. Thank you.
Thank you for your time this afternoon. David Warner with the Distilled Spirits Council regrets that he cannot be here today. His organization still is under travel restrictions because of COVID-19. So he sent me to speak on his behalf. Dear Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity for me to present this statement on behalf of my client, the Distilled Spirits Council of the United States, better known as DISCUS. DISCUS is a national trade association that represents some of the world's leading distillers, as well as over 100 craft distillers across the country. DISCUS and its members have enjoyed a long-standing working relationship with the Mississippi ABC and look forward to the discussion on how we can improve upon the system that is currently in place. First, I'd like to state for the record that DISCUS is a strong supporter of control states and the three-tier system, especially here in Mississippi. We view this marketplace as a robust and important one, and we do feel that there is untapped potential due to the current warehouse situation. As you already know from press reports, the existing warehouse cannot keep up with demand. However, this is not new and something both the ABC and industry have been dealing with for several years. In fact, this legislature recognized the need for improvements a couple of years ago and appropriated $4 million for the ABC to purchase a new building. Unfortunately, that did not come to fruition, and we are now back to square one. Control states across the country have worked hard to address their warehouse needs and have modernized operations. And you've heard from several of these folks today, some that I'm about to mention again. Virginia is one such example. The legislature recognized the need to reinvest in their state-owned ABC warehouse and passed a bond bill that resulted in the construction of a brand new state-owned warehouse that will serve the state for many years to come. Ohio is another such state. They still retain ownership of their warehouse operations, their pricing and profits, but have contracted with a private logistics company to run their day-to-day operations. Iowa is a third example. Like Ohio, Iowa has contracted out with a third party to oversee their warehouse operations while still maintaining ownership of their physical buildings. The states that I mentioned are just examples, and DISCUS is glad to serve as a resource for you as you do your research during the study committee. In closing, we would be remiss if we did not register our strong opposition to any increase in the current markup or the imposition of any new fees, such as bailment fees, as a way to pay for any upgrades or improvements to the current warehouse situation. An alternative that we have shown great support for in the past, and you've heard many here also mention, is some sort of retained earnings model where either a private sector party or the state ABC warehouse can retain some fraction of the profits that they generate for the state for R&R and any sort of upgrades and improvements. Thank you for your time and consideration, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Submitted by David E. Warner, Vice President, State Government Relations of DISCUS. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions from the committee? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to give Meg and Chris any opportunity they want to make any comments on anything they've heard, if they agree, disagree, or if there's anything. And I think after hearing them, there may be one or two questions for y'all, but y'all have anything you want to just add or
Just in response to something Chairman Lamar had asked, Virginia converted from a state agency to an authority that it was effective January 1 of 2019. In their 2015 General Assembly session, they enacted a bill to move them from a state agency to an authority, similar to the way they operate their lottery authority, their port authority, their tourism corporation. So that information is out there if you're interested in that. I just wanted to give you that piece of information.
Meg, if you don't mind, I got a couple questions that came to mind that I didn't think about previously. Can you tell us, maybe a dumb question, but that's okay. When we think about the sale of alcohol, I think about package stores. How does that work with on-premises restaurants? Do they have to, does every restaurant order their shipment straight through ABC too, or can they go to the liquor store and buy?
Two different options that they can take. They can order directly through the ABC, just like a package store, but several years ago we did create a wholesale package store permit that allows package stores to become wholesalers, and restaurants can buy through those wholesale package stores as well.
Okay. The tax structure on that is the same?
Same.
Last question. ABC, the price that ABC sets for package stores or whoever they're selling to, how is that determined?
Those prices are provided to us by the supplier. They set the price that at which we pay for that product, and then we add the excise tax, the markup, the 7% sales tax, wholesale sales tax, and that's how the price is made. And the statute does require that we sell in uniform prices throughout the state, so we sell regardless of who you are, how much you buy, we sell it at the same price.
So just to make sure I understand this correctly, if the price of a product changes at a package store from week to week, that is based off of whatever the producer changed their price to ABC, or either that package store changed their price. That has nothing to do
Correct.
with ABC, or ABC has nothing to do with that price. Is that
No,
right?
our prices are set by the suppliers. And so there could be just a price change on a product, or a product could be on what they call a special pricing allowance. So an SPA, like a sale for that month, could change the price of it. But we don't set any of those prices.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions from the committee for our guest? Representative Powell?
It'd be a quick one. I spoke with Herb a year or two ago. If we went to like Virginia's model and removed wine from underneath y'all, how much help would that alleviate, or space would it give you? Would it help or not be any change?
Well, it certainly would alleviate some space constraints in the warehouse. About 60% of our floor space is dedicated to wines, and so it certainly would help us as it relates to the capacity of our warehouse.
And then do y'all have more breakage with wine or spirits, or is it about the same?
Probably about the same.
What was your last question you asked her?
Breakage difference between
Oh.
wine?
You said that y'all, right now, you're at 70% spirit sales, 35% wine sales, but 60% of your space is dedicated to wine?
More of our floor space is dedicated to wine, and a smaller percentage of our case sales comes from wine, yes.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Commissioner, do you have any other comments or anything? Well, I want to thank everyone for coming and speaking today. This has been a pretty good informational hearing. Tomorrow we'll have several of our local businesses from across the state that will be here to kind of offer their insight into what they deal with. With ABC, obviously we know the kind of what the problem is, but we want to give a chance for them to kind of let us hear in their words, and also offer any suggestions that they may have how to proceed. So this is open for them to put any ideas they have into the process, and let us hear from them. So without you got anything? So we'll be here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. To start the hearing again. So thank y'all. Rise and report.
That makes sense.